there's a lot of, you've seen a lot. You've been across different industries, different companies, different size organizations. It'd be really interesting to hear your perspective as AI is consuming everything, as kind of the ways of working are being disrupted. There's a lot of people in specifically the design universe or user experience universe that are like, oh no, what do I do now? Like,
Right.
what happens? And I love your take on that.
Building great experiences, revolutionize your business. Building great experiences, innovative strategies. Building great experiences, elevate for your customers. Like, comment, and subscribe.
Hey folks, this is Drew with another episode of the Building Great Experiences podcast. Today I've got my buddy, Andy Vitale, and he's done a lot of really great things in his career. We met each other several years ago,
when I was
5, 6
at a
years
bank.
ago. Yeah, right. So he was leading design at a bank. He went on to be an executive at rocket companies. Most recently was chief design officer at Constant Contact. So he's done a lot in his career. Super excited to have you, man. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. I'm really excited for our conversation. It's nice to get a chance to chat.
Yeah, for sure. So I love to kick off the show with kind of who are you, your origin story, if you will, kind of what brought you to where you are now. And then, really what I'm excited to get into in a minute is like the future of customer and user experience. Like, where are we going? What does it look like? It's a big topic. Lots of people discussing it. But
Yep.
let's start with just kind of where'd you come from?
Yeah, so I'm Andy. I'm a design executive. I've led design at companies like 3M, like Polaris, Constant Contact, the ones you mentioned, Truist, rocket companies. But how it started for me is I originally started to go to school for TV and radio.
Oh,
And I went to Brooklyn College, and I don't know what I wanted to do at that point, actually, but I had a radio show, and my radio show was broadcast, especially when I filled in for people, over Brooklyn Cable Access Television. So you can see community events, and then you could hear my voice, my radio show.
you got a good voice for radio.
Yeah, right. And because of that, I actually had a couple of interesting guests on. So we had a few wrestlers, we had a Typo Negative, the band, just people and places and things that were local to Brooklyn. And I had a wrestler on my show, and his name was Chris Michaels. And at some point, a buddy of mine and I, we decided we were going to have him train us to be pro wrestlers. Dropped out of school, started to learn how to wrestle enough to
Amazing.
make someone look good that was going to win that night, not me or my tag team partner. Did that for a couple of years and realized, you know what, this isn't going to be how I make a living. I'm not like 6'5". I'm not built for this.
Yeah.
So I decided I needed to go back to school for something, and computers seemed like the right thing. So I was living in Florida at the time.
Okay.
Wrestling had moved me to Florida, no state taxes. It's easier to be an independent contractor there. And my two options were computer networking or computer graphic design. And I was like, I don't really see myself climbing through ceilings to lay cables. So design sounds interesting. Plus wrestling, you have to pivot, you have to tell a story. I can really draw a correlation, especially years later, looking back on it, on how that has made me a better designer. But anyway, graduated from that school. Started out in early days of web and some print jobs. One of the companies that I ended up at was American Media. I was working on all of the tabloids. So Sun, Star, Inquirer, Weekly World News, like all of the trash magazines. And, we were the first anthrax attack in the United States. So back in 2001, a few news outlets and politicians received anthrax in the mail. Well, we were the first. And our photo editor opened up a package, and he actually died. And
Wow.
I remember sitting at home, and I got a call from my dad who's like, hey, your company is on the news. You have to go down to this hotel ballroom in Delray Beach, Florida, and the Department of Health is going to be there. So we got there, and it was the Florida Department of Health, the CDC, the FBI. And they basically said, hey, sign this paperwork. We're going to monitor you. We're going to take care of you. But we honestly don't know what's going to happen to you. We know a little bit about anthrax from an outbreak in Russia in the 60s, and these spores stay dormant for a certain amount of time. And fast forward to getting swabbed and being told that, hey, you seem to be okay, then seeing a special alert tone on the news and learning that, hey, the tests are inconclusive, come back again. Do you want to go back to work in the building? Was the question I was asked. Not the actual building. They had moved into another building.
Yeah.
But I was like, no, like I'm good. So I was like, well, what do I do now at this point? So I called the school that I graduated from and said, hey, is there an opportunity to teach there? And they said, yeah, at our Port St. Lucie campus. So that was about 90 minutes from my house, one way. So I was like, all right, I'm in, right? Yeah. I need it. So I taught day and night classes. So day classes were 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Night classes were like 5:30 or 6 until 10 p.m. So there wasn't really enough time to go home and come back. And also it didn't make sense to. So I was teaching like the main programs that you used back then: Photoshop, Illustrator, page layout, Dreamweaver, Flash for web, right? And I was like, there's these emerging disciplines, these UX disciplines. There's content strategy, information architecture, interaction design. Like, how do I learn these? So I started to teach those to myself. And then I started to like practice them. Then I started to teach them to my students. And I think that when you teach something, you really have to know it because people ask you so many questions about it, which is why I still teach to this day. But at that point, I ended up deciding, okay, like it's time after a few years of helping them transition to a university through full regional accreditation as department chair. I was like, I need to go back out into the field. And I went back out into the field, but it was South Florida and it wasn't a hot design market. So I was relying on my print background with opportunities to do some digital things. And at some point I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll go back to school for healthcare. Like maybe this design industry isn't lucrative. So I ended up starting to go to a program for pre-nursing, ran into a couple of friends who were starting an agency and they were like, come on board. And I was like, all right, I could do kind of both, right? And our first client was BlackBerry. And we launched a huge project in Latin America. And I had gotten paid more in one project than I had through my entire design career. So I was like, all right, I'm in. This is great. Yeah. And, at some point our agency went away and I ended up being the first mobile designer at Office Depot and really working on a lot of cool things that we now use every day. And that's kind of like my origin story of how I've pivoted my way through. And from there, it's just been a fun ride.
Dude, love the story, man. I love it. I feel like I heard you talk about the wrestling thing one time and like one of the, because you do a lot of speaking engagements and I think you had shared one of those stories. I was just floored when I heard it the first time. It's a good, great story. Funny enough, like I've had some funny little ups and downs and roundabouts, very unorthodox path as well. I think it's really interesting because in the industry, people are always kind of like, what are the boxes I need to check to be able to do blah, right? And it's like, well, that's not really how it goes. Like only really in the last decade have we started to get these like sort of, you can go to college and learn this thing. And frankly, and I'd love your opinion on this, I think a lot of that has actually been a disservice to people because they haven't had to kind of like learn the sort of art and science of it, right? They're thinking about it in okay, there's this linear process that I'm going to like do this type of research. I'm going to do this type of prototyping, wireframing. I'm going to do this type of testing, Right. Never works that way in the real world. Right. And so then they're like, oh, but I'm trying to execute the process that I was taught in school. And you're like, it's not really the way it goes, man.
Yeah. I think that schools, there has to be a reason why you want that degree, right? So I ended up going back and getting my master's in user experience design for a couple of reasons. One, because I wanted to go back and teach at that level. And because it feels like a great way to like give back to the community. And also as I get later in my career, like one day leading just a program might be the path for me. Yeah. The other thing about it is like there's foundational knowledge because I was self-taught. I wanted to go back and learn like the way the books say to do things.
Right.
But I did it later in my career. So I knew that like this isn't a linear process that you have to follow.
Yeah.
I think that, schools are really interesting because there are some really good ones and there are some really bad ones. And I think that the schools that, that have the good reputation, they're churning out students that know how to work because they're giving them real world practical experience as part of the program. It's not really relying on them to get an internship or find a job to do that. But what I think is different today than used to be is companies expect to hire students who are able to just hit the ground running and be like 1 point. Like if you think about people in general, right?
Yeah.
And I would never want to think of people as numbers, but a person is a unit of one. Good performers are able to do 1.25 to 1.5. Not so great performers are like 0.75, 0.8. They weigh down people from time to time.
Yep.
And when students come in, especially interns new in their career, you can't expect them to be doing the work of a full like mid-level senior designer. And companies expect that. When I broke into design, I sucked at it, right? I learned on the job. I had people that sat next to me that invested in me like, hey, you could do this shortcut. Hey, have you ever done this before? Or someone, I remember one job for a cruise line, I was going to get fired. And one senior designer was like, she said that she would work with me. She told, like, my boss said, hey, if it were like my call right now, I would probably let you go. You don't have the experience that we need after a few months. He's like, but Susan decided that she's going to invest time in you and invest time in your growth. And I want to give her that opportunity. And like, that doesn't exist today in a lot of places. And I think that we have to realize that when people come in out of school or transitioning careers, like if the passion and the desire to learn is there, that's great. Like you can't teach that. The other things, you have to teach them. You have to develop them. And somewhere along the line, that's gotten lost.
Yeah, that's good. No, I love it, man. I think this is a nice segue to kind of looking ahead, right? Like there's a lot of, you've seen a lot. You've been across different industries, different companies, different size organizations. It'd be really interesting to hear your perspective as AI is consuming everything, as kind of the ways of working are being disrupted. There's a lot of people in specifically the design universe or user experience universe that are like, oh no, what do I do now? Like
Right.
what happens? And I love your take on that.
Yeah, there's a couple of things to unpack there. And I think the first one that I think of is like the future of building products. And the way I look at it is design, engineering, product, the triad that we all rely on, have gotten to know. I think those become more competencies than disciplines. And I think what we're looking at is the rise of what I like to call the full stack builder. It's the person that's still kind of T-shaped, that can dive deep in something like design, but can leverage AI to do things like help write requirements, help, synthesize research, help write code. I've seen AI write such clean code lately through prompts and fix itself. And I've seen tools where people can actually put into Slack the ability for you just message this bot, which will then reach out to an AI that will check the code, offer suggestions, and then pass it over to another AI that will actually fix the code. And I'm like, as I've seen that, and I've seen product people and engineers who are like, well, let me try to build some wireframes. The wireframes still aren't good. The design side still isn't good. So I think designers may be best positioned to lead these building of products as long as they do a couple of things, right? This is the second part I wanted to unpack. I think having talked to a lot of executives, they don't see a lot of designers being able to lead cross-functional teams because when they look at certain designers in a room, they maybe don't understand the full business perspective. But I think we've changed. I think as a design industry, we've been like, all right, we've got to go deep on metrics. We've got to go deep on business. And now we're starting to tell designers, after we just rocked them with learning all of this, you've got to now learn how to use AI to supplement your work. You've got to learn a little bit more coding. We used to always argue, should designers code, right? But I think now we're looking at how do you do more? How do you bring things to life? How do you actually ship the things that you're designing? And how much control do you have over that? So what I was starting to say is like a lot of times designers earlier in their career in meetings, they aren't vocal. They kind of like, agree in the moment, but then walk out of the room and that becomes a fracture. And they like to say, oh, I don't really agree with that. It's like, well, why didn't you speak up in that moment? So I think we have to continue to teach designers how to show up and show up professionally and through the lens of business in order for them to be seen as future leaders.
Agreed. Yeah. So it's interesting. A couple things about what you said. One being like using AI to do some of the work to build faster, I think is dead on. one of the things that I'm seeing right now, there's a lot of like startups that, they're operating lean. They're like, we can't hire more people. And so you've got a design team of one, or maybe a product person or whatever. And they're having these conversations, and like in the room, they're using like Vercel V0, Code.dev, like Lovable, any of these tools to like actually generate like proofs of concept in a meeting. You know what I mean? It's which is kind of wild, because you're starting to bypass the like typical PRD, product requirements document, and like all the sort of backlog and user stories and all this stuff. You're going straight to, here's a like functioning prototype that demonstrates the intended functionality or most of it, right? And you can like nitpick and noodle on it and like give some prompts and change. And now you're suddenly like, okay, this is a functioning thing. It's not necessarily the what we're going to launch with, but it's like a thing that gets everybody in the room to kind of like, yes, that's what we want, or that's what we're going to build. You're refining it from there, and it doesn't require sprints and sprints and sprints of work, or like tons and tons and tons of people. And I feel like that's going to become more and more common. And like one of the things, like with my team, like I've been really reinforcing was like experiment with all this stuff. Like just play with it. Like block time every day, just like experiment with these tools. And I think it's like people, designers in particular, but everyone needs to have like this kind of AI first attitude about it, where it's like, how can I get AI to help me kind of like quickly get something on paper to show people, not tell them, which I think is a lot of kind of what you're saying. Like designers need to show up differently at the table, but also be able to demonstrate like, here, this is kind of what I think based on like my business acumen, based on my understanding of the user, the customer, based on like my understanding of our organization, whatever. And then it's like, yes. And then it's more of the like polishing and refining the like, okay, let's go battle test this now. Let's go put it in front of real people. Right.
Yeah. I agree with you on 99% of those things.
I love to hear what's 1%.
Well, let's start with I think designers or anyone that builds products needs to look at AI as a partner, right? They are literally your co-pilot. And I think that having that ability to generate design is always talked about show, don't tell, but somewhere along the line, we've done a lot of telling and not as much showing. Yeah. And I think that using these tools can get you there for sure. Yep. What I start to worry about is we're already looking at, and especially with SaaS companies, homogenous designs across the board. Yeah. Everything looks and feels the same. Yep. And I think AI right now is being used for a lot of like personal software. Like you can create a tool that serves your unique need, and you can do it in a weekend. And it's really cool. Like I'm going to start building something that pulls like certain parts of LinkedIn profiles into a database so that I can just have like a competitive analysis of people in the industry. But ultimately, when you think about like products that you want to put in front of people, that functional is great. And I think we're going to start to see the need over time of how we add the human element and solve the human problem into what we're generating in like, I don't know, what we would call it co-design, right? Back in the day. So I think design is still going to really heavily have to break trends to make sure that products have things that make them distinct, both from a functionality and visual perspective, as opposed to like building something that looks like 500 other things. It's going to be hard to win markets that way.
I've talked about this on the podcast before, but like I really believe that the next, or the thing that people are going to be needing to focus on is differentiated experience, right? It's like if everything you've got the sea of sameness, right? Everybody's building the same stuff with the same tools and the same, kind of like underpinnings. Like what makes you different? What makes you better, right? And I think that's where we're going to have to spend more of our energy is thinking about like, how do we differentiate? How do we understand the nuance? Like it's not just it, meets the needs of the user, but it's also like that surprise and delight, elevated kind of like, wow, this is amazing. Like this is so much better than blah, 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 blah. Right. And I think that's where the hard work is going to come. It's like AI is going to make it easier to generate tons of ideas and get a bunch of stuff out there. It's going to be the discernment of like which of those are the right ideas and it's based on like a lot of just psychology, nuance, business needs, like all the different sort of factors. You could be playing chess,
Right.
right? Like it's not going to be like if everybody's playing checkers, like, oh, I just generated this thing and now I have this tool or app or whatever, and it's like solving this problem. If there's like everyone's doing that, and you have like thousands of options, right?
Exactly. And
What's
that's
going to make it different?
and that's where I look at like AI is doing a good job at like teaching people how to build software that feels personal to them.
Yep.
But with the right data and the right manipulation and leveraging AI with the data,
Yep.
you can start to build products that scale on being more personalized for individuals. So instead of it's personalized for me that I'm building, it's personalized for me or you or anyone else. So that if you and I go to the same website, we have slightly different experiences, or we use the same product. It knows enough about us, about our behaviors, about our past usage, that you're surface different information than I am that feels exactly personalized for you. So I still think we're looking at the rise of like personalized software, personalized experience. Maybe personalized is the wrong word. Maybe it's individualized.
Yep.
And I think that's going to be exciting. Whoever can really focus on unlocking that at scale is going to it's going to be really exciting.
Yeah. You made me think of something. I had a conversation with someone else recently about like localization.
Yep.
So it's like you get this like hyper individualized experience, but it's also in the context of like your local, like we're currently sitting in Charlotte, North Carolina. So it's infused with things that are really relevant to me in my daily life with like taking kids to school and like whatever, right? Like it has all that kind of awareness where it makes it even feel more kind of like, wow, this is for me. But then to your point, you could use the same thing and have a very different experience with it and be like, wow, this is like so personal, so tailored. I'd love to hear your thoughts on like kind of, so we've been talking a lot about products and digital experience. How about like physical experience, like what, or service experience?
I think, when I say design, I think the full spectrum of design, not just digital, but physical environments and spaces. And I think service design, what we can do on a screen, we need to do, and we're seeing that done. I think that was the area that went first, physical locations. You can go to restaurants and have amazing experiences. You can go on vacations and have amazing experiences. What we haven't been able to do is elicit the same feeling, the same emotional response from things that are digital because they're less tangible. And I think that for me, like, how do you blend having the same experience in person as you do on a device?
Yep.
And a device has become an extension of yourself. So there's an opportunity to do that. But we've tried, right? We've tried to build supplemental experiences using technologies like augmented reality. I worked on augmented reality back in 2012 with the band One Direction, where you could go into an Office Depot and hold up your phone to a folder or pencil, and Zach, Liam, Niall, Harry would come to life and they'd like tell you a story or sing you a song. And I think we thought at some point you'd put on the glasses or the VR headset and you'd walk through the mall and like stores would just, if they're interesting to you, they'd pop out and be like $20 off these sneakers in this store, like come in here, or like $5 off this meal at this food court, like go here. And that hasn't happened. And I think it hasn't happened because people feel like there's an invasion of their privacy still. And I think that when we translate, it's more intimate, I think, a physical experience than a digital one. So finding the right way to kind of blend those two worlds together is something that companies are still trying, right? Facebook with now glasses, or Meta with the glasses, and Apple with the VR headset that like isn't performing well. I think as a society, we're still not there yet.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it will be that makes us there, but it's got to be a way that we blend the two together to be supplemental of each other. So I think like if I'm at a restaurant and I'm walking through the kitchen and they're serving me this 18-course wonderful meal with molecular gastronomy, and I would love to be able to like on my phone just kind of like hold it up and understand like what the recipe is or what the ingredients are, because they'll tell you once, but like you're like, that was good. I don't know what that was anymore now that I ate it.
Yeah.
So I think like finding the right way to blend those is going to be key.
Yeah. So it's funny. I spent a lot of time thinking about this. And one of the things I've been pondering is, have you ever seen that movie, Her? Joaquin Phoenix?
No.
Okay. So it's a pretty good one. I think came out in like 2014.
Okay.
But essentially everyone it's kind of this future, not far future scenario where everyone's walking around and they have like basically like AirPods in, and then they have like a little phone device, and they each have a personal operating system, like
Right.
an OS. And so in this movie, like I won't give away the kind of end, but basically, Joaquin Phoenix is talking to Scarlett Johansson, who is like this kind of operating system AI, and he's going about his day, doing his job, whatever, and like the OS has a little camera and is kind of observing and taking in information and then doing things on his behalf without him having to like send emails, call
Right.
people, blah blah blah. I think that that is potentially the next phase of this, because to your point, I think like there's a lot of discussion about like VR, AR, and like, this is going to be the new thing. And like, to your point, like Meta came out with their sort of like whole like metaverse, whatever. People haven't taken on to it as much as people expected, right? Like the Apple Vision Pros haven't been adopted as
Right.
much as people expected. In hindsight, it's kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. Like the technology still isn't, it doesn't fit on your face
Right.
as like,
it doesn't feel natural.
yeah, it just kind of is like, it's a clunky and whatever. Like we're still probably a ways away from that being like super organic and natural feeling. But I think what's maybe in the more near term is like Apple rolled out Apple Intelligence
Right.
in the fall, or I should say they are starting to roll it out, right? So Siri's getting smarter, Alexa's getting smarter, Google Home's getting smarter. And I think there's a world where you start to have like your phone and Siri that's on your phone, she knows your calendar, she knows your preferences, she knows what you're doing, da 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 da, and is starting to make decisions for you,
Right.
right? And so there's this blend of like digital physical, because your operating system or your Siri or whatever is kind of just doing things on your behalf. And so I think it becomes even more important for businesses to think about, like there's this whole discussion around SEO.
Right.
And like SEO is getting blown up right now because it's really more about how do you give the right data to the LLMs, the AI, to like help people find what they're looking for.
Right.
Right. And similarly, I think there's going to have to be a thoughtful consideration around how do we make sure that, someone's Siri is finding us and delivering the right message to the right person at the right time, providing a great experience and seamless experience from like, I'm going to go to dinner with my wife or whatever. I'm just told Siri on my drive over, it's handling it. And then like it's seamlessly connected to the restaurant's
Right.
system so that when I show up, everything is just like easy and clear. And there's no like, we didn't book your thing because,
Right.
Siri called and she didn't like
Yeah.
all of that becomes intuitive. And
And they
seamless,
should
right?
know your dietary preferences.
Exactly.
When you said that, the way I thought of it is if you and I are having this conversation and we're like, hey, you know what? We should have another phone call later. It should be able to check both of our calendars, schedule
Exactly.
it for us, and ping us and be like, you're scheduled to meet
It's
with
done.
Drew like next Thursday at 4:00.
Exactly.
Right. And
Yep.
and I think we're seeing that with agentive AI a little bit. I think it's starting to do things on your behalf.
Yep.
I think people still have a long way to go with comfort levels too.
Yeah.
People used to be scared of AI. One of my first AI projects, I was working at 3M. It was in healthcare, and we were doing auto-suggested coding through natural language processing. And at first, it was like medical diagnosis. For medical billing, how do you get codes out the door effectively, efficiently? And we watched, and people were like, I don't know that I would trust the machine. I know these codes. It's
Yeah.
like 178.01 is like hip replacement. Those aren't the right codes. But
Right.
then the government changed the classification, the diagnosis classification changed, and it required more specificity. And all of a sudden, people were like, well, wait a minute. I don't want to open up this big book and have to relearn and rememorize these things. Why don't you do it first? And I can read and I know, like, did you get it right? And you can handle the number system. And it moved into like an approval mode.
Yep.
And that caught on for us. And I was really glad that happened. But ultimately, I think that when I started at another company, digital marketing company, we were like, people may not be comfortable hearing AI, where some companies are like, AI is just, do you offer AI features? It's just like a checkbox on a comparison chart.
Yep.
But we were like, customers may be afraid of AI. But then we learned, like news outlets, everyone's doing such a good job of educating people on what AI is,
Yep.
that we didn't have to do that work.
Yep.
Which was really nice to not have to like re-educate people and rebuild trust and like recom fears and focus on like safety. I mean, those are things that are all really important, but having to do that on top of shipping your product and showing the value that this is adding. And we just learned that AI has become a little bit table stakes, and you don't have to introduce it as an AI feature. It's just how it works. It's just a thing that it is. So I think as we think to the future, as you were talking about, it's about getting people to trust as there are new developments in AI, because it becomes every time we've heard about AI in the past until it's here, it's been dystopian in some way. It's been Black Mirror. It's been iRobot. It's been like AI is going to eventually learn enough to like make humans their servants, right?
Right.
And it's like, no, I mean, maybe, but hopefully not. No, I'm still very nice to my AI. I still use manners and I don't yell at it just in case. No.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think there's this interesting period of time that we're in right now where, you know, when GPT came out in November of 22, I remember that Christmas, like friends and family being like, "Oh, check this out! I like made a shopping list," and it was like kind of this kitschy, fun, whatever. But I think that like because the barrier to entry is so low now, like it's so much more approachable. Like anybody can go to ChatGPT or any of these tools, Gemini, and just like start using it. You don't have to create an account. You don't do whatever. You can just start messing with it. And it makes it feel less like invasive or scary or like, oh, it's just this little like conversational whatever. And I think because of that, like the general, like the zeitgeist, everyone's more willing to use the things and not as like afraid of it. I think there's still like some timidity. Like people are kind of like, I don't know. But I mean, I've had conversations with folks who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and they're playing with it. Right. Which to me demonstrates like, okay, like we've kind of crossed the threshold where we're no longer, there's like, unlike AR, VR, where it's only like the super bleeding edge people that kind of bought a Vision Pro and like played with them or whatever. Or like back in the day, Google Glass, like, you know, there's only like a handful of people that got them. We're at the point where like the mass public is using AI tools, which I think makes it so that a concept like I'm going to use Siri to like, I'm talking to Andy and they're going to talk to each other and book our calendar and we don't have to go figure it out. Like, I think people are less worried. It seems like less worried or afraid of like the privacy or whatever.
Yeah. I think GPT still does a lot of menial tasks for people, like, hey, build me some recipes or this meal plan or something. I think when we get into like being more autonomous, I think that's when people have to figure out, or we have to build some sort of safeguards for people that want them. Like you and me, I'm like, yeah, schedule my thing. But I would, if I was a little more apprehensive, I'd be like, send me I'm about to schedule this. Are you okay with it? Are you sure? Right? Just build in some safeguards or put in some friction points. I think we often, especially people who build products, we've got like two modes. Like there's friction only when necessary or remove all friction. And I think friction is good at certain things. Especially when I was at a bank, it was like, if you're going to send a certain amount of money to somebody, you want to make sure that you don't just accidentally hit an extra zero and hit send, right? You want that like
send your life savings.
Exactly. So I think with AI, there's opportunities to do that. There's opportunities for the people that build the products to build in ways to get people more accustomed to using them and kind of ease them into it in more of a progressive disclosure way, as opposed to just like open up the fire hose and like some people will love it. Some people will be freaked out and won't use it again.
Yeah, it's funny. My team and I are building right now an AI day trading app. And we've had this debate over that exact thing where it's like, okay, if AI is making trade recommendations, like, you know, the client was like, well, just let it do its thing. And we're like, whoa.
Right.
We don't want it to go like put everything on one stock. Like we need to like sort of trust but verify sort of thing and have that more review and approve, human in the loop, like, you know, type it. So we're building it where, you know, you get like a notification on your phone. It'll tell you like, here's the recommended trade and like how much or whatever. And it can be like, yep, go. So you're kind of like 1, 2, 3 versus like, it just does it. And then you're notified after, because to your point, I think people are still like skeptical of like, is AI, how good is it really? Right. And so I think for things like financials, healthcare, those kinds of more, especially like the regulated industries, definitely have to have more of a like restricted
Right.
kind of like you have to check the box as a human still. But for stuff like sending calendar invites, like
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like a easy peasy.
Right. Exactly.
Well, cool. Let's change gears a little bit. Who's doing this well? Like, there's a lot of small, medium, big companies that are like playing with the like future of customer experience, user experience. They're leveraging AI tools. Like, I'm curious if there's anyone that like notable that stands out in your mind as like, hey, these folks have figured it out. Like, they're really on a kind of the bleeding edge.
You know, I still am not seeing AI fully embedded in a lot of places like I would have expected. So I see it as supplemental. And I think like if you look at an AI company, Claude is doing a really good job, right? I think that the Claude product has decided to focus on people who code, and they've really made that a little bit easier. Now, Cursor is another great tool, right? Because you can create code with prompts, and you can then change frameworks if you want, and it will save you hours and hours of time. When I think about products that I use every day, I think you're seeing it still in chatbots. They're becoming a bit smarter. I've seen it for job interviews. I've had a conversation. I love to test all these things out. I've had a conversation with you upload your resume to a bot, and I forget who makes it, but I can look it up, and if you have show notes, we can drop it in there. You get a phone call, and it asks you questions, and it'll say, tell me about a time you've had to lead your team through a really uncomfortable situation. And you give it an explanation, and it will say like, hey, that your team must have felt really appreciated the way you handled that. And it like acknowledges, it gives some feedback, and then it will go to the next question. And I think that, you know, I've dealt with some recruiters who you talk to and you're like, wait, they zoned out. Wait, they're not listening, right? So this AI was like, it hit the right buttons. It gave the right, like it worked perfectly. So I'm seeing its use in industry. Waymo, I rode in a Waymo. I went out of my way to ride in Waymos in San Francisco. I can't wait to go back to Config this year to ride in Waymos again. Like that was such a cool experience. And people were like, weren't you freaked out? I was like, no, I felt completely comfortable. Things stopped for a pigeon, right? Like, so I'm like, this is, I felt safer in that than anything else. So I think those are companies that I'm really seeing do it well. You're probably closer to like seeing a wider aperture of things. So I would kick that back to you of like, who's doing it really well right now?
Yeah, I honestly I think that there's two ways I think about this. There's the kind of like differentiated experience piece and like who's creating different experiences that are kind of elevated above everybody else. And then ways of working, like how are people working different and leveraging the capabilities. On the like differentiated experience piece, this one's come up before on the podcast, but I think it's worth calling out. Duolingo is like, it's the way in which that they are delivering their products and services to the market is so unique, has so much character that I think it's like, those are the kinds of companies where there's other like language learning apps and things out there, but like they are like head and shoulders above everybody else because they've invested in providing a unique, memorable experience, right? And so I think that a lot of companies who are trying to figure out like what should we do, I think like don't be afraid to be a little bit weird. Right. You know, like Duolingo, I think they actually just recently killed their owl or whatever, right? It's like this little cartoon owl, and if you haven't seen it, it's like this little green owl. I think his name is Duo or something, and they just recently really had like a kind of like, hey, Duo's dead or whatever campaign. But anyway, the point being like they have this kind of cool style. It's very different than like a lot of other kind of language learning brands out there. There's other companies that are doing this too, like where they are investing in things that are unique and interesting. Like this is another kind of a weird one. I'm blanking on the name. Meow Wolf.
Okay. Yep.
So they're like
physical.
Physical experience. And I share that one. Like if for those who haven't are not familiar, if you go, there's different places around the country. One in Vegas is one I know of. It's this like unique experience where you go into this shopping, like this grocery store kind of a thing, but it's just like dystopian future grocery store. And as you go through it, it's somewhat like an escape room,
Right.
right? Where you like find a door and you opens into another room and there's more interesting things. I think that there's a world where, businesses and business leaders should think about those surprise and delight moments. Like, what's something that's going to make your business special or different or unique, or like, it's not just a transactional do the thing, right? And historically, or I'll call it like legacy industries where, let's call it like manufacturing, healthcare, home services, like these kinds of industries, they've just been doing the same thing for decades. And it's like, how much more will you stand out if you're doing something that no one else is doing?
Right.
And you have to you have to like not be afraid to try something unique, right? Yep. So anyway, and then the other thing I'll say about the ways of working piece, I think startups right now are the obvious ones because they're not encumbered by all the like the red tape and bureaucracy of large enterprise. So, there's a lot of startups I've been watching. They're like a startup of one, and you've got one person and they're like, they've built and launched a product. They're experimenting with all of these AI tools. You mentioned, Claude and, Cursor, thank you. And like there's Replit and Code.dev and V0 and all these different tools. But those tools, people are using them to very quickly get things in the market to prove product market fit.
Right.
And I think like bigger companies can learn from that and say like, you don't need what you think you need to test ideas.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And you just sparked two other things for me. I'm seeing like customer service tools really expanding. I'm seeing the ability for if I'm on the receiving end of a customer service call, AI is letting me know the person's sentiment on the other line of the phone.
Yeah.
And I'm getting a script in front of me that changes based on their mood, their behavior, and how I can handle that. And I think that's super exciting, the companies that are rolling that out.
Yep.
And I talked to someone the other day that they're not a company that creates podcasts at all. They have a regular B2C business, but they also have a B2B arm of the business.
Yep.
And they're using Notebook LLM to create customized podcasts for their sales team.
Whoa.
That tell them about the customer they're going to visit with some strategies that would maybe help them close a deal that they can listen to in a bite-sized chunk on their way to that client's office.
That's cool.
And it's like, that is a great use of AI to keep people like busy and learning and continue to have growth at the same time.
Yep.
I think like if I'm a company, if I'm an employer, I want to find ways to grow my team, to level them up, keep them learning, keep them growing, keep them challenged. And that's like AI is a great tool for that. Like I'm not seeing, like I want to see it more leveraged through like HR.
Yeah. I think customer service is a great one. I've seen a lot of the same things, like tons of tools that are coming out that are making it where, people are getting that kind of like brain download of like, these are the things you need to know about this customer before you walk into a meeting, or the like real time. We actually, when I was my previous employer, we had built this POC like 2 years ago where you could be on the phone with this was like a wealth management company. So you'd be talking to a broker or talking to somebody on the phone, and in real time, it's taking the transcript and summarizing what the customer's saying on the other side, or the client, and then providing like real time recommendations. So if you're like a wealth management advisor or a broker or whatever,
Right.
And you're talking to your client, and that client saying like, "Hey, I'm thinking about this. Like, I saw this thing happen in Japan yesterday. Blah blah blah." Like that person is getting like real time kind of like feed of here's the news articles or the headlines related to what your client just said. And there are a lot of things like that are now happening in contact centers where you're not having to like hold please and then go find it and like bring it back. Like it's just like it's showing up on their dashboard in real time.
Yeah. I would say that I can, in my mind, I'm thinking like my grandfather's generation would tell me that if someone needed to look something up on the computer, if someone needed to learn what you were asking before they make a recommendation, that they don't know their business well enough, right? Like his financial advisor, if he had one, would have like known what to recommend, but him not realizing that they were only pushing the ones that they were like making more money off of. So now there's so many more options in front of you
Yep.
that being able to deliver quickly a personalized recommendation is so much better, because what you would expect that person to do, like you said, is put you on hold, go like make sure they know all the details, do
Yep.
that research, then come back to you with the right recommendation for you. We're able to speed that up so much, 100x now
Yep.
these days, which is like the ability for AI to process information and provide a recommendation. The only thing is sometimes you see on the news that it's not right? It's factually wrong and people know it.
Mhm.
So what I've learned to do is look at the reasoning models, because as
Yep.
it's getting more advanced and as it's getting the reasoning, you can see the reasoning.
Yep.
Then you could ask it like, hey, could you give me the sources that you used to find this? And if you look through that source list, you could see if it's reputable or not.
Exactly. Yeah, the like GPT rolled out O3 Mini
Yep.
like within the last 2 weeks, and it's got the reasoning, and
Yep.
just like Perplexity, you can see like cite your sources. Here's the stuff I got. And to your point,
Right.
sometimes it references things you're like, it's not really like a source that I want to reference from.
Right.
One thing I'll throw out there, we're doing this a lot. I'm curious if you are. So we use a tool called Otter AI, which is like basically like call transcription, service. Joins a meeting with you,
Yep.
records a call. One of the things we're doing a lot with it is we're like at the end of the meeting, taking the transcript, and like I would say that its summarization capabilities are like okay, but we're taking transcript. So like let's say we're in a scoping conversation with a client, we'll like take the transcript, bring it to GPT, give it like 2 prompts, and it'll like scrub it and turn it into like a like a summary.
Right.
But also it'll have like detailed requirements based on the conversation. Like we did a workshop like a week ago, and like previously, this like in the design world that we live in, there would be like workshops, and then it would spend like days synthesizing
Right.
and digitizing all of this stuff. We literally got out of the workshop, took the transcript, we screenshotted the like Miro board, whatever, and like threw it into GPT, and we had a summary
Right.
of everything that
Yeah.
was decided instantly. Right?
Yeah,
It's
that's
crazy.
awesome. I use Granola as a tool.
Yeah. Yep.
The thing I like about Granola is it kind of runs in my background,
Yep.
so it doesn't necessarily like join my meetings, but it's there.
Yeah.
And then I used another tool the other day called Fathom Video.
Yep.
What I didn't like about that is after a meeting I had with somebody, it sent me back the transcript with like timestamps, and
Yeah.
then I could go back and watch myself on video say the things that I said.
Yeah.
And I was like, shit, I didn't want people to know that I would. Well, first of all, like I thought this was like a private conversation. So
Yeah.
it felt a little like not only did it record audio, but it recorded video.
Yes.
And it kept the recordings, not just the,
Yep.
the transcription of it. So I was like a little weirded out because I didn't know how it worked. Now that I know, I'm like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
But I kind of like Otter's. I've joined a ton of meetings with Otter, and that feels fine. And I love
Yeah.
how fast it like recaps the meetings. Where back in the day there'd be a dedicated note taker,
Yep.
right? You'd actually have to have a person that, hey,
Yep.
your job in this meeting now is not to do anything but take notes, right? Because it's hard to take notes and be involved in the meeting.
Yep.
So now you can show up and actually like participate in the meeting because the notes are being taken. Now we'll still all take notes, right? We'll still jot down key
Right.
things, and that makes sense. But yeah, the synthesis part is unreal.
It's wild. And there's some tools that have come out where like research repositories, which were classic tool that were used in the design and research world, like AI can do it for you. It can create a repo.
Right.
Right.
Because it used to be like, go to this Google Drive folder
Yeah.
and try to find your way out of this, or the SharePoint site.
This Airtable,
Yeah,
and you're
and-
like, oh, okay.
And now, like, it's digesting that information. So it's almost becoming like the brain of the company.
Mhm.
So anyone in the company can be like, what do we know about this type of user?
Exactly.
And it will dig through all the research that it has access to and give you that answer. The only thing you have to do with that is make sure that you have, like any good content strategy, there's a start and end date for when content becomes old.
Yep.
So like if you're doing a research study every year, you probably don't want one that's 4 or 5 years old, because that's going to
Yep.
change the data that you get.
So yeah, that's a great point. I think we haven't quite figured out how to make sure that when data is stale,
Right.
like how do we like sort of sunset it or whatever. This has been a great conversation, man. I'd love to wrap up with like some practical things. Like I'm big on like what we're gonna go do, right?
Right.
So for folks listening, typically like product design, business leaders, what do you think they should take away from this conversation? Like, what are the top 2-3 things you think people can go do from now?
Yeah, go play. Be a builder. Go, like, if you have an idea, even if it's something like your own personal website, like, play with these tools to build it or rebuild it. I think you'll be surprised at what it puts out, and you'll also have to still leverage your expertise to like fine tune it in certain ways. But I think taking a daunting task and just diving in makes it less like of an unknown. And I think the more you play with, the more you use these tools, the less scary they are and the more they really become helpful for you. I think the other thing is be involved in conversations, right? Where are the conversations happening around this? Because like any community, like it takes learning from one another to be able to do that. So dig into like who's playing with a new tool, share that, or you and a friend or a couple of people like divvy up a couple of different tools and report back. I think like we're in this stage of curiosity, but we're also, it's moving so fast that it can move faster than you. And it's easy to feel like you're very behind. And how do you stay ahead of that is super interesting. Those are like the two biggest things that I would recommend for people to do.
I think those are dead on, man. I can't agree more. Like experimentation is like so crucial right now. Like to your point, like don't be scared, don't play scared, right? Like I think the good news is you're not behind. If you haven't really messed with stuff, like everybody's learning it. Like if anyone tells you they know what's going on, they're lying to you.
That's right.
And then I love the community piece too. Like I think kind of setting the AI topic to the side, really what's going to become even more important is the relationships, right? Like as work evolves and gets easier, and a lot of the administrative or sort of tactical things go away. What will always remain is like human relationship, human interaction, and so something I've been kind of sharing with folks is spend some time and energy on the softer stuff.
Right.
Like, if you're an executive, and maybe invest in executive coaching. If you are, kind of a rising leader, maybe get a mentor, right? If you are an individual contributor, like start to think more strategically about the business and think about how do you create value, because it's like a lot of what we've been talking about, it's commoditized, right? It's getting commoditized. You don't need, knowledge doesn't matter. Like what you know isn't as important because a lot of this stuff is starting to get commoditized by AI. But building those relationships, having the ability to navigate the nuance, having the ability to influence, right, and kind of bring an organization in alignment towards creating value, those will always be in style. Right. Those are always going to be needed. So it's kind of maybe silly or simple as it sounds, like invest in yourself, like learn and grow as an individual, as a human. And the other thing is, I would say, I've talked about this a lot, but like talk to your customers, like, find out from your customers what they need and want and what they care about. And as your industry may not be being disrupted by AI right now, or may not necessarily, it might feel like, oh, that's down the road. That's a kind of future me problem. Like, your customers might tell you otherwise. They might say, hey, like there's this other business over here that I'm working with now because they're faster and easier and differentiated versus you guys. Right. Yeah. And you might not realize that right now. So anyway, those are a few others.
Yeah. I think like be curious and talk to people. I try to talk to people a few hours a week, no matter how busy my calendar is, at all levels.
Yep.
Because the emerging talent are going to tell you like what the interesting tools are. Yep. The more experienced talent are going to hear about like how different industries are working, talking to customers all the time. You have to know not just what your customer needs and wants, but you have to be experts in how they actually use your product. Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes doesn't happen in organizations where like, oh, I talk to my customers every day, but do you actually know how they use the product? Or do you only know how to like get pain points from them? And build your personal board of directors, which you were talking about, right? Like look at your group chats. There are people I talk to about AI. There are people I talk to when I need to like really reflect. Am I handling a situation the right way? Yep. The people that will make you think about things differently. If I want to dig into craft, there's a conversation around like who's doing it right? What does it look like? What is good? How do we evolve? So like you should have those people that you can turn to ask questions and really help you grow. And that's like the best thing you can do at any point in your career.
Yeah. Man, this was awesome. I really appreciate you being on the show. Where can folks find you online?
Yeah, LinkedIn's the easiest, right? I mean, that's probably the best place, actually. I'm most active on LinkedIn. I'm still on all the socials, but most places it's just so no one else has the username.
Yeah, right.
But I lurk on them, so
Cool.
yep.
Yeah, awesome. And folks, you can find me, Drew H. Burdick, on all social platforms. Andy, thanks again for being on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks. It was a lot of fun having this conversation.
Yeah. See you guys later.